This webcast and any accompanying materials are copyrighted by the American Association for Respiratory Care. Any public display, sale, copy, or distribution of the video or materials may only be undertaken with the prior written consent of the AARC. Copyright 2016, all rights reserved. My name is Shauna Strickland. I am a respiratory therapist, asthma educator, and Associate Executive Director at the AARC. I welcome you to today's presentation, The Duty of a Respiratory Therapist, Professional Ethics and Licensure. Upon completion of this AARC webcast, participants will be able to summarize the board's responsibilities and licensure, employ a plan to complete your licensure application, explain what it is to be a professional, and describe the attributes of a respiratory care professional. I am pleased to welcome Mr. Joseph Goss. Mr. Goss is an assistant professor at Bergen Community College in the Respiratory Care program and an adjunct professor at Seton Hall University, where he teaches bioethics. He is active with the AARC and serves as a delegate from the New Jersey Society for Respiratory Care to the AARC House of Delegates. Mr. Goss has no relationships to disclose. I disclose that I am a paid employee of the AARC. Brand names or products may be mentioned only as examples of technology. Joe, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Shauna. I appreciate everyone being here today, taking their time out of their day to take a look at what's going on in licensure and just to have an idea of exactly what really is involved in it. My interest in following the licensing board in New Jersey sort of, came out of the fact that I'm always interested in, some of the legislative and regulatory issues. And, this is the group that is responsible for, setting up, the practice regulations within your state. And a lot of times, you might be able to go to the website of your state licensing board and review the material that they have posted, but it doesn't give you the sense of a lot of the discussion that went on behind the scenes. Why was one decision chosen before another one? So I've been involved in and interested in the licensing board for quite a while now, and just monitoring things. I have not been, just make that clear, not really much of a disclosure, but I've never been on the licensing board. I've just always has attended as a public member. So most boards are set up that they'll have public sessions that are open for everyone, but then certain business is handled under an executive type of a meeting. So I just want to let everyone know that that's where I'm coming from, is observations and readings as a interested public member on things. So I want to begin right now is just talking a little bit about licensing and where it began. And I don't mean to go all the way back to sort of the Middle Ages with licensure, but that's really where the whole idea of medical licensing came from, is the structure that was set up. It was sort of understood that not everyone who practiced different trades would actually have a understanding. So there had to be some type of an organization set up, and a lot of it came out of the vocational groups, and they developed their own regulations or standards on how to treat individuals. And that would continue on to a lot of the trade professions, of course, that go back there. But I'm just going to keep it in with, medical licensing is, of course, what we're thinking of at this point here. So there has been a long history of the idea of licensure. It's not just has come around as more of a modern times type of a thing. Today's licensing boards, though, have a few different types of roles. They do monitor and protect public safety and health and welfare, as well as the monitoring of the practice of respiratory care and the individuals that work in our field, as therapists. So, the roles, sort of kind of vary on both sides there. They're there for the public, and they are also there for the patients themselves. Some of the responsibilities that the boards have when you're look at how they're set up and how they're organized there. Is of course they have to conduct any of the board business that goes on. So any types of letters that are written to the board from licensees, from patients, or from trade groups, these are the types of discussions that go on at the meetings. They do develop, of course, regulations. Some states might call them policies, or however you want to understand them. That sets up the standard of practice. Now, those regulations, of course, though, do come from, in many cases, the Practice Act for respiratory care within that state. A lot of times there is some interpretations as far as if there's a more vague type of scope of practice set up in the Act that might give the board a little bit more leeway in how they might set up a larger and more diverse standard of care, or I don't say standard of care, standard of practice for respiratory therapists. So the regulations are usually in flux. Many states, you probably read about it in your state, will go through some type of a sunset, and basically what that is the board's responsibility to review over and make recommendations, and it does vary from state to state as far as the responsibility goes on those. They review the applications. One question I didn't get the chance to do is I hope there's some students in the audience listening, because we will spend time later on in this presentation talking about the licensing requirements, but they review the licensing as well as practicing therapists that might move around the country and need to get another license in another state for work purposes. And they review the qualifications, which was something that we'll also go over a little bit later. The investigations is the other side, and then the disciplinary action that comes from any of their investigations. Some of the complaints that we'll also discuss a little bit later on. Some of the complaints that can be coming in from other practitioners. The one thing that I say often is, outside of the patients that we take care of, we kind of have to monitor our own profession, and it is a hard thing. If we were talking ethics, it becomes something of a difficulty when another practitioner has to think about turning their friend in, but that's a discussion for another time right now. Patients, as I mentioned, can also file complaints against therapists, and it's the board's recommendation to carry out whatever types of appropriate discipline might be necessary. They monitor and enforce continuing education. So all of us here will be earning our continuing education. This will count ideally for all of your licensing board requirements as far as any renewals. Now this, of course, keep in mind there is sometimes confusion comes down, which is different from NBRC continuing education requirements from your state requirements. So keep that in mind there. I'm always speaking for the licensing board requirements of looking at things. So a few misconceptions I want to also discuss right here is that the board is there to advocate for the therapist. The board's primary responsibility is protecting the public. They are there to set up our scope of practice. I discussed that just in the prior slide, but they're not there to advocate for us. So when things do go wrong, even when things do go right, they're to remain an impartial party to it all, because they need to be able to fairly distribute out any types of action if anything needs to be done. So that's one of the misconceptions. They're not there for us. They are made up of respiratory therapists in many cases, but there'll be physicians, there'll be individuals probably from the state that'll be assigned to the board. There might be a physician or two that are also assigned to the board, but they're there for the public. Another misconception is that they're concerned with only clinical competency. And that's not really true either, and we talked about that also with some of the roles that they have. They're responsible for, of course, evaluating the renewal process for licensure. So for all of us that are licensed already, they're making sure that notifications are set out in the appropriate time and all the information that's needed to renew a license is sent back to them. So they're looking for all of those. They're looking for any type of dishonesty in the application process. This could be an initial license or it could be a renewal license. Has something changed in your life that you needed to notify the licensing board about? And that'll be something also we'll talk about a little bit later as well. And then just some simple things. And these items I pulled in from various states' board requirements, but even just wearing identification badges is something that a licensing board could be responsible for monitoring, which is, again, is not clinical. And again, failure to meet any continuing education requirements. The ARC has a great resource online that they provide. I can't give you the web address, but you'll be able to find it. That lets you know how many continuing education credits are needed for each of your individual states. A couple of other misconceptions is that any disciplinary action that might take place in one state will not pertain to another state. And that, of course, is not true. The states do communicate to a national data bank where information is uploaded anytime disciplinary action is taken. It's also our responsibility, whether we have a respiratory license or any other license, to notify those boards that some type of action has been taken against our license. So, it's another area that people think that, I did something wrong here, and I'm just going to pick a state. I did something wrong here in New Jersey, and if I move out to Ohio, I'll be safe. And that's not the case. The other misconception is that, well, I've gone through school and my licensure, darn it, I want it. It's a right, I've earned it because of all the education I've done. And the states, though, view the license as a privilege, very much just like a driver's license is a privilege. Just because you're of age and you've taken appropriate examinations doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be getting a license there. It's something that the states are very much looking at, and again, it's the licensing board's responsibility to set up all of those standards and to evaluate the patient, evaluate the applicant to verify that they are actually qualified and having a license to practice. So I'm going to move in now here to a brief overview of talking about the application process itself. Now, again, as I mentioned, I kind of went through about 5 or 6 different states throughout the country, so I cannot directly speak for any one of your individual states, and a lot of this information is pulled together, a piece here, a piece there, some of the more important topics, pieces of information topics that it seemed each state seemed to have very much in common when you're applying for your license, or even, again, perhaps if you are renewing your license. So the first thing, of course, is completing the application. Whatever state that you plan on practicing in, go to that state's Respiratory Care Board website, download the application. I believe there was I think it might be Florida, and it might have been a couple of other states that actually have an online type of a process that you need to go through in order to begin the licensing process. But whatever it might be, is complete the application. Submit the appropriate documents. That's something that you need to keep in mind, is that nowadays the boards want to know that you're the individual who's actually getting this license. So a passport type of a photograph is something that's going to be required by most of the boards. Current copy of your MBRC certificate or your credential letter. Some states, again, varied on whether they wanted actually just a copy of your certificate. So once you've passed your CRT or RRT exam, that you submit in a copy, and again, would be a notarized copy of that certificate. Some states may want a credential verification letter actually sent from the NBRC to that specific licensing board. If you're licensed in another state, they'll probably want a copy of that other state's license or some other verification letter from the board that you are currently licensed in to be directly sent to the board that you are seeking an initial license in. And again, that just goes to verify that you're active with your licensure. Again, active could just mean that you're maintaining an active status, continuing education, and the other credits and processes are all up to date. or on the other side, if there's been any types of disciplinary action that's been taken against you. They just, again, want to make sure that they know that information, and that information is disclosed. Most states also are going to require a criminal background check, and along with that criminal background check is going to come a separate fee. So keep in mind as you're filling out the application that you're just not sort of adding up one total of $100 for the application, $100 for the license, and $25, so you're going to write out one check or a money order altogether. The monies are sometimes different, so you want to, again, pay attention to the instructions when you're filling out the fees and submitting them in there. Some states also, along with that background check, include a fingerprinting. So you would need to then, once you receive notification from the board of where to get the fingerprinting done, that you then schedule an appointment and bring in all the appropriate documentation to have fingerprinting being completed. And that might be something new. We went through it here in New Jersey about 5 or 6 years ago, don't remember exactly when, of getting fingerprinting done. Documentation confirming a date of birth, birth certificates, driver's license, that's also sometimes important. And the reason for that is a lot of times regulations are written that an individual has to be of at least 18 years of age. And while you might be able to write it down and on an application form your date of birth, the state will perhaps look for the documentation to verify that you're of age to get a license. Completing your education at a high school level or some type of graduate education diploma. That's another area that I know from my students. I teach, as Shona had mentioned, at a community college. Some of our students have gone to school out of the country, and they'll need to actually have some information being evaluated by an outside agency to verify it. Even if you've gone to school within the states, there's been a lot of schools that have been closed down, they've merged with other districts, and it's become sometimes difficult to get that information. And those are things that you can work with your licensing board on, but again, it's another piece of information we need to gather. Continue certification for CPR from an approved provider. There is a requirement there that a minimum standard of at least everyone in order to have licensure has a CPR completed. A notarized copy of name change. So if you've been married or for some other reason have changed your name and information from, let's say, your high school is listed under one name, but you're applying for your licensure under a married name, you'll need to have some type of documentation indicating that the name change is actually appropriate and you are who you are when filling out the application. Verification of medical employment. I'm not sure this is something that comes from New Jersey. I couldn't find it too much in other states, but what they're looking for is, are you employed, and not necessarily in respiratory, but in any medical employment from in-state or out-of-state. They also look for an employment record. They want information going back for nearly 10 years, and this is sometimes also a difficult task for individuals, as again, respiratory in some cases is a second career because your previous employer had gone out of business, and students, initial applicants will look at me and they'll ask, well, what do I do? And, well, write down as much information as you can and explain your situation in a letter to the board, and again, have the board work with you. But these are, again, additional points of information that will need to be included. I've also had some discussion, again, my experience here is just from within my state here, that a lot of times it's these pieces of information that actually hold up the licensure of individuals. Things have worked out probably a little bit better now, but when you're asking an employer, again, a previous employer, to fill out an application form, and it's a very short two-sided form, and mail it back, it sometimes does become very difficult and time-consuming for somebody who you were previously employed with. and they'll shuffle that off until they have more time, and that initial graduate who's applying for the license will wonder, I've passed my exam, I've submitted everything else in, what's missing? And it will just be this information that's missing from them. So that's actually an area that you might be able to help a little bit, is getting this information, even maybe including when you contact your previous employers, is a self-addressed envelope to the board. Social Security numbers is often required, and again, this varies by states, but what I have highlighted there, and this is why the Social Security number is important, I had mentioned it earlier, is this National Practitioner Data Bank and the Healthcare Integrity and Protection Data Bank. Now, this is that national data bank of information that holds all the medical records, whether you're a respiratory therapist, a physician, a nurse, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, whatever your employment is, they hold on to all this information. The licensing boards themselves, the states themselves are required to input any types of disciplinary action that has been put against you in a particular state, and the information is available then for other state licensing organizations, either in other states or even within the state, to download and get that information from. The interesting thing also about this is now it's the Healthcare Integrity and Protection data. This actually was a piece that was part of the Affordable Care Act that was passed, more affectionately known as the Obamacare. But this was a piece that actually pulled together a couple of groups that was monitoring this information and put it under one roof. So it was probably kind of helpful for actually having this type of a change to the whole information gathering completed. Citizenship and your immigration status, this is something else that the licensing boards are going to be looking at, and some other items that the states look at, just again monitoring people and finding them, student loan information if you're default on student loan, child support, and any medical conditions that you might have. You may need to disclose some of that information to them. So again, they have a complete picture of who they're going to be licensing in the states. So completing your application now. So this is some information that goes out to hopefully some new or initial applicants that have not gone through the process. Some of you that might be moving from states that have perhaps a slightly easier licensing process than others. I kind of feel that my state is probably one of the more difficult ones to get a license in, just because of a lot of the questions that are asked on the form, and I have some examples of those in the next couple of slides here. But as I had mentioned, read the application and all of the instructions that are included on it. They're going to provide a whole lot of information for you and ideally make the application process a lot easier. Complete it as a draft. Don't go through it initially, especially if you're going to have an application that you're going to print off and fill it out either by hand in some fashion and then realize you've made a mistake and then have to go back and make some type of a big correction to it. Understand the application questions. Knowing when to use yes, no, or not applicable in certain situations will help you in actually probably preventing some problems from occurring. There was one state that actually wanted you to initial in boxes. So as opposed to checking a yes or no to a certain question, they actually wanted you to initial, and that is actually, again, something that could hold up your application. If you actually just are normally used to filling out a form and putting a check mark in a box, no to this, yes to that. The one particular state was actually looking for initials in the box. Your application fees and licensing fees, I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but make sure that you make the checks payable to the appropriate board or agency that you're applying to. Many of those fees that you're filling out, especially for the application fees, are generally non-refundable, which means you might be laying out as little as $25 or $30 in some states, or as much as $200 or $300 in other states for a license. And that money is just for the licensing board to begin opening a file. Make sure that you sign and date all the applications in front of a notary public. It's a lot of times you get so excited about that application, you're making sure that every single box is filled in, including where the date goes and your signature goes to. You bring it over to the notary, and then they inform you that they cannot, notarize it because they did not actually see you sign any of those documents. So make sure, again, you pay attention to those types of instructions as you're reading through the application and filling it out. So some examples of some application questions that may come up again on either initial licensure or on a renewal for your license. And the first one, have you been found guilty or charged with any violation or practice of respiratory care? And ideally, everybody out there practices to the best of their ability, so you're going to answer that as, of course, as a no question. You've never been found guilty. Have you ever been summoned or arrested, etc., etc., misdemeanors, whatever it might be, or offenses? Have you ever been employed or directed as supervising a person who is not authorized to practice? This is one area that I think some people, I feel, find very surprising, in that if you are a supervisor or a director of a department, and whether you know it or not, that individual did not renew their license and they're now practicing without a license, that you could also be held responsible for that case. And that then would need to carry through on your renewal for your license to be occurring. So that question, again, is more directed toward the renewal and a supervisor's renewal. These are some of the more yes, no, or maybe type of questions, or yes, no, or not applicable questions, really. Is, do you have a medical condition in which any way impairs or limits your ability to practice your profession without a reasonable skill? Well, initially you may look at this and say, no, I don't have any medical conditions, but the question is actually asking you, in any way it impairs or limits your ability. So again, you got to be careful with that. Are you currently engaged in the use of any illegal drugs or controlled substances? That one pretty much a straightforward yes or no. This next one, though, does your use of chemical substances in any way impair or limit your ability? So that's an interesting one. If you answer no to that question, you could read the question as being no, the use of chemical substances does not impair my ability to practice. So you're sort of in one question saying, perhaps, no, I'm not using any drugs, but the drugs that I do use don't impair my practice. So you got to be careful when you read through those questions there on how they're actually being asked. So just sort of summarizing the application process here as far as going through things. Again, read the application. There's a lot of information on there that will, again, help you navigate through the process. I had mentioned you'll complete the application as a draft. Have somebody else read it through. Have your brother, sister, your wife, or husband. Even if you're, again, a student and you want to go back to your instructor and say, can you just look this through? I have a question on something. They'll probably have some insight that perhaps you don't have. And again, it's just making sure that the information is correctly filled out and the question is answered the way that you are reading it yourself. Try not to lie or omit any types of information. And this is where a lot of times you can get yourself into trouble, and I have some examples of those coming up with any types of disciplinary action that's been going on. If you do have something that you're not proud of that you've done in the past that might have been related to, again, one of those offenses that a question was asked of you, omitting it could be just as much trouble as actually disclosing the information. And in those cases, disclose what you've done. Again, my feeling generally is that licensing boards will perhaps work with you, depending upon, again, what the offense is. And again, I've not been on a licensing board, so I can't answer that as an affirmative. But again, the licensing board is there to, again, protect the public. And if it's something that's happened in a far past, they might just issue you an application with some type of a condition attached to it, with perhaps some probationary period. So, don't rely on it if you don't like something that's been done. Don't omit information. When you fill out information, if your licensing board, as I mentioned, is looking for an employment history, and you were employed, let's say, between 2000 and 2005 or 2006, and then you have this 5-year gap of no information, no employment that you're disclosing to the board, and then all of a sudden you're back employed there. It might just be something as simple as writing a letter to the licensing board along with your application explaining why you don't have an employment history at that point, rather than them trying to figure out, okay, where were you during this 5-year period when you're looking at it. So just those 3 simple tips there to leave you with. Just read the application, complete it, and review it before you actually sign, get it all notarized, and realize there was something wrong. And again, don't lie or omit any information. One other thing I didn't include on there, again, depending upon how the information is being sent to the board, if it's not being completed in an electronic form, you may even want to have the application being sent as notarized as a return receipt through the post office. So this way that you know that the licensing board actually received your application. Again, spending all the time completing the application, getting the notary done, getting the appropriate checks and money orders, whatever is needed for the board completed, only to find out that somehow it was lost in the mail. It would not be a fun thing to go through. So it might be a number 4 there is perhaps think about getting it a return receipt for the board. So at this point now, congratulations to all. I would say that you're licensed. And I broke this down into 2 sections here, and I always feel, and I've always been told, to end on a high note. So I'm going to go with the low notes to begin with. So that's why I have the congratulations, you're licensed, and now losing it. So this is where things can go wrong for us with the now that we have a license. So the 3 things that everyone should really know. The first thing, of course, is your State Practice Act and your regulations, your policy. This is what sets up the scope of practice, what we can do, and in some cases perhaps what you cannot do. It sets up a reporting system. Who do we report to if we need to report any type of action that's been taken against us, either in our current state or in another state that we're licensed. So get familiar with both of those there, Practice Act and the regulations. Understand the causes of discipline. And again, like I said, I want to start with a low note and we'll end on a good note. So understand what can cause you to have some type of disciplinary action taken against you in your state. Substance abuse is a very big one. Domestic violence, sexual abuse, incompetence, theft, and reporting issues. The first few of them, the substance abuse generally is, of course, just against you as an individual. Domestic violence. The sexual abuse could be, again, patient-wise, so it may not necessarily need to be something from the outside. The incompetence, again, would be caring for the patients. Theft, again, very common. That seems to have been popped up as I was doing some of my research. Therapists, when we go astray, find it sometimes very tempting when we're caring for individuals that carelessly leave things around. And reporting issues. And the reporting issues generally will go back to the supervisory role. I would say that if you are a supervisor, and again, either knowingly or perhaps not even knowingly, supervising or employing an individual who does not have a license. So those are some of the areas of discipline. And it's an odd one to include in here, but I think it's something important to think about, is the therapist-driven protocols. States themselves, of course, licensing boards themselves do not set up therapist or patient-driven protocols. It kind of makes something clear there. But a lot of states are including the use of protocols as part of their regulations. So it sort of goes back to number 1, but I thought it would be something perhaps to split out here. This is the area, of course, everyone probably is familiar with protocols, listening to other webinars, where we get to really exercise our judgment. We really have the ability to perhaps make a significant impact in changing the course of therapy for patients for the better, of course. The downside, though, of course, is it brings in the decision-making process. It makes us actually think about the care that we're providing for individuals. And this is where it perhaps leads back to some of the causes of discipline, which would be that incompetence. As much as you can say that we were working with a protocol, the protocols are still your judgment. So be very familiar with how the protocols work, and again, probably more institutional versus a regulatory state type of an issue. But it's something that's very important, and know the limits of where the protocols lead to there. So those are the three things that I would say that are important to keep in mind. So the allegations against therapists, and again, they generally begin with any types of complaints, and the complaints come in from other therapists, they'll come in from other practitioners, nurses, physical therapists, whatever they might see, or again, patients or family members are the general sources that you'll find the complaints coming in from. Employer complaints are usually the ones that perhaps are the cases where a therapist arrive at work and they are intoxicated, showing signs of just the inability to focus and concentrate, and they recognize that there's something wrong there. So that would probably generally be your employer there that would be reporting those. And many boards, as I've mentioned, also require self-reporting, and this is where it becomes our responsibility to notify the licensing boards that we are the ones that are doing something wrong, and I'm disclosing this right here. And again, it's usually much better to disclose early than to have the licensing board find out in some other fashion that something has gone wrong. So I have some examples here of these couple of slides as far as some disciplinary action that's been taken. I've tried to remove as much information as possible. I don't want to feel that I'm singling out anybody that is currently practicing, but just to highlight some of the areas that the licensing board within the different states are looking at here. So this first one here, and I've highlighted the important part, is failing to comply with the requirements for profiling, credentialing, making misleading, untruth, fraudulent representations. Again, so this could have been an individual who is applying for either a renewal or an initial licensure, but they just didn't comply with all the requirements and disclosing all the information, or fraudulently including something on, again, the application itself. And that went back to one of my points, is don't omit and don't lie on the application. So this was somebody who was disciplined. The respondent failing to report to the board who is convicted or found guilty. So again, this is that self-reporting that we're responsible for. Again, this individual, something went wrong. It could have been a theft from a supermarket, could have been a theft from a convenience store. They were caught and they were convicted, and they just did not report that to the licensing board. So again, the licensing board took disciplinary action against the individual. In this case, the violation of a lawful order from a previously entered in a disciplinary hearing. I hate to say it, but there's some people that just probably do not learn from their mistakes. This was an individual who was brought before the board. They had a disciplinary hearing. Both parties agreed on what the outcome was going to be, and they went back and in some fashion violated that agreement between the licensing board and the individual themselves. This next one kind of touches on the clinical topic. This individual discontinued a mechanical ventilator on a patient without a physician order. And again, it could be that we did anything without a physician order. We, of course, practice under a physician or other licensed individual to practice medicine. And in this case here, the discontinuation, of course, led then to disciplinary actions for the individual. practicing respiratory care without first obtaining a license. And if you take a look at this one here, this was an individual who had a temporary license. I do not believe that this was December 31st of last year, so this goes a few years back. But the individual was licensed. It expired on December 31st. They continued to practice until January 11th. So basically they practiced respiratory for, can we say, less than 2 weeks, and they were disciplined by the board. So don't think that there's a small time frame that you can go in to the board and say, no, I know I did this, but it was only for a short time. It made no difference to the board. It was only 11 days. And they may not have even been working each of those 11 days, but they were disciplined by the board for practicing without obtaining a license. And again, this was a temporary going for a renewal type of a license. This one here again moves into the individual who was providing prescription medication to a coworker. So again, this one touches on the drug use. Failing to have a pulse oximeter measure a resident's oxygen saturation when changing the resident's tracheostomy tube and leaving the nursing aide alone. Failing to seek assistance, failing to record the resident's record of the complications that occurred. So this goes back to documentation, that the therapist failed to document the proper information into the patient's chart. Again, there must have been complications that occurred, and it rose to that gross incompetence that, again, we talked about earlier, and disciplinary action was taken against them. So you can see as this goes along here that there's quite a few areas that licensing boards have been made aware of the actions that we've taken. And of course, these are all the negative actions that we take. It's something to keep in mind that we are being monitored, and it's the licensing board's responsibility as well as other individuals' responsibility for actually licensing the individuals and monitoring the license. So my next part here under your license is going to be keeping it. So this is going to be all the good stuff. So now that we're licensed, how are we going to keep our license? How are we going to prevent a lot of those problems that we were just discussing there? So your license, congratulations, your license. Let's keep it now. So the first thing that we need to do is be a professional. Now I'm going to go, the next few slides here is going to be a little bit more of what is a professional and kind of defining down some of the characteristics of a professional. And it sort of breaks down into these few areas here. Is a professional is going to be accountable for their actions. They're going to have some type of excellence. They're going to strive for excellence. They have this moral duty, honor and integrity, respect for others, and altruism. So at professionalism, what is a professional, or what is a profession sort of defined down into? It's a concept that's a contract, and again, this is a definition here from Paulson, a social contract between a physician and the public. And again, I would extend that to a respiratory therapist ourselves very easily. It's a contract between us and the patients that we're taking care of. And that's sort of what he defines down as the whole concept of what professionalism is. So this social contract and the professionalism, it serves as the expectations. The patients have expectations for us to be competent. Very much nowadays they're expecting us to allow them to have autonomy, even in a hospital setting where it becomes very minimal, the amount of autonomy, but they want that and they expect us to maintain that. They want us to, again, be honest and have integrity. It's an important part of actually treating and having the patients respect us and having positive outcomes when we see with our patients. They want us to be able to observe us working as a team. I think one of the things that is very much sometimes forgotten is, we're there as part of a team. We're not just there working on our own with looking at things. And they want us to promote out the public good. So this is that expectation. This is that social contract that they have between, again, the public who we're treating and then us. The accountability side now, I'm going to go through these few things, just breaking them down very quickly here, is sort of the professionalism, and they have some type of accountability for what they do. The assumptions of the layperson is that they're not able to understand the judgments that we're making. So they want us to know that we're going to be accountable for our actions, and we'll be able to actually take some positive actions and make the changes that are needed. So to the moral duty, moral character here, this sort of comes around from the idea that has evolved, placing a different person within the society. What is our virtues? What's important for us to actually provide for our patients? The different types of traits and the attitudes and the trust between each other is sort of just our moral character when we're looking at it. And so this mortality here is sort of the relationship that we have between others. And we need to realize that our actions do reach out and touch other people as we're looking at them. So we want to establish and kind of preserve these types of guidelines, and this is where professionalism comes from. Now values, for some of us, of course, coming up in a couple of weeks might be our final football game, watching the Super Bowl. Other people may value money or their phones, but more so, this values is really just surviving and thriving more so as as a culture and as a group of people. That's the values that we're looking at. So it's not so much the possessions that we have. The idea behind it is just the value that we're providing. So you think about that in the patient care that we're providing and the value that we're actually giving to the patients and providing the knowledge to them. Some of the subgroups to them, and I want to actually get to the group mentality because I feel that that's sort of what fills in for us being members of the AARC. But we do have our personal morality here, is our collection of individual values. Society, we've sort of become codified with our laws and our customs and our policies. Sort of falls down with the morality within society. And as I mentioned, the group morality here is, everyone, no matter who they are, sort of joins into some type of a group or subgroups. And again, for us, I would say that would be our AARC. The service organization would be an example of this group. And it provides a structure, it provides guidance. The codes of ethics that are provided out to us is things that are important. And again, being part of a group morality is something that's important to us and should be important to us. Sort of embrace some of these values that we're looking at. Citizens on the other side are sometimes not needing to hold on to any types of large confidence when we hear and talk about other people. As a professional, we are expected to keep confidence. Citizens, the everyday person, it's going to be sometimes non-judgmental about a person's characters. It's something to keep in mind of how things differ, though, between the profession and sort of just the way individuals or may act on their own. Integrity here, I can't verify this quote, but I'll give this quote to Tony Dungy, again, football coach. Integrity is the choice between what's convenient and what is right. And again, this is what comes down when we're at the bedside and treating individuals, recognizing that as much as I would like to do something, it sort of is important that we actually keep in mind that we need to do the right thing even when people are not watching. Another really quick quote here on integrity. Again, doing the right thing when no one is watching. I just mentioned that there. Altruism here, a couple of different forms to it. And again, this is the positive and negative to those sides with things. The egotist is going to be one who's going to make the person feel good and look good to others. So they're sort of ones doing positive things, but for others, the pure person that really just wants to eliminate the suffering without actually getting anything back there. So different types of professionals may look at different situations and why they're trying to improve the welfare of other people. Is it for themselves, or is it sort of in a complete disregard for themselves or for their own benefit when they're looking at things there? So I'm going to finish up here with talking about being a professional in just these last couple of slides here. So being a professional, again, sort of what we had just gone through, a little bit more of maybe the academics of it, is belonging to a professional association and subscribing to the professional journals. Respiratory Care, of course, provides our science journal and all the research that comes out, and there's a lot of other journals out there that are very useful to us as well. I could also tip my hat to the ARC Times as sort of another type of professional journal to be looking at. So demonstrate professionalism. Don't forget about your personal image. Got to watch out with social media. You may want to become friends with some of your patients depending upon where we're employed with, but you want to maintain sort of that professional distance with them. Be sensitive to cultural differences. Watch out for stereotypes and first impressions of individuals. Keep in mind that it is a small world out there. There's people that you'll talk to, and the next thing you know, you're like, wow, you didn't recognize that they would have heard something that you had said or someone else had said. So keep those things in mind, when you're professional there. Improve your communication. Develop good communication skills. Make sure that you're listening to your patients and acting with empathy when you're treating them. There's a lot of things that patients will tell us if you allow them to just continue to have a discussion that you feel might not be on target, but they'll provide some little piece of information in there that you hadn't thought about, or something that no one had actually asked the patient about. So keep those in mind there. Maintain a portfolio. One positive thing that just happened in New Jersey is there was a therapist who just a week ago Friday was shopping at a local Costco's, I believe. An elderly person had fallen over, was found to be in a cardiac arrest, and she saved that individual. I mentioned as far as maintaining a portfolio, but it was actually something that hit the local newspapers. I would take that and put that into my little portfolio there to keep that as something special. But some of the more important documents would be any certifications and continuing education that you have, thank you letters and award certificates, the public event there also. Again, I mentioned for that one therapist, that did something on the positive side there. But include all that stuff in your portfolio and maintain it, so that you have it available to you. So I'm going to end here just talking about with the AARC and their statement of ethics, and this is not their complete statement of ethics that they have. I just thought that these were the sort of the three things that we hit on with this discussion today, which is the integrity and trust, seeking the continuing education opportunities, because again, this is what's going to develop us as individuals, and comply with state and our federal laws, which again goes back to applying for the licensure within our states. So with that, I got a few references there for people that can take a look at. And I'll say thank you to all of you for attending today, and I shall hand it back over to Shauna if there's any questions that anyone might have.
Hi, Joe. That was fantastic. As a matter of fact, we've had quite a busy chat room over here with a lot of really great questions. One of the first questions that came up, and it came up multiple times, is can you keep a license if you are not currently employed?
That what I would have to say would be, it would probably vary from the state to state. In New Jersey, yes. Many states, I would say, probably follow a similar pattern that you would be able to go inactive, which means that you're no longer currently practicing respiratory care, but you want to at least keep the license and let's say your folder open at the licensing board in the state. So I would say yes, if you're not practicing, you would be able to maintain the license and switch over to the active status. Inactive status. When you then move from the inactive to the active status, you would just have to contact the board to find out what some of those requirements might be to move into the active status. It probably would be some type of a continuing education to be caught up with, and maybe a smaller fee that you would be paying to move to the active status. And very likely there would also probably be a nominal fee to even remain inactive.
Thank you. Another early question is about licenses being specific to state. So we do not have reciprocity agreements, and so states don't cross state lines. Why do different states have different prices and requirements, and why doesn't respiratory therapy as a profession have a license, a national license like nursing?
That's a great question, and it was something actually I looked into in preparing this presentation. I probably could go on for another 5 minutes just discussing it, but I'll probably try to summarize it very quickly. You would have to look back to the history of how the licensure was developed and the relations that those who developed within your state took the route with. New Jersey, for example, we're licensed under the Department of Law, so a lot of things are looked at from a very strict legal point of view. New York, for example, and in New Jersey we have our own licensing board. New York is licensed under the Department of Education. They may look at things a lot more from the educational standpoint on things. I don't want to minimize down and again speak for any boards, but I would say it really probably would go back to the history of the development of the licensure for each individual state and what each individual, let's say each affiliate, each state group could put together and get through. As far as the national compact is what it would really be referred to, again, it goes back to how the different states are organized and what you can do in one state and another. As much as the ARC has a nice model practice act that states can use and try to modify, it's just not the case. It may actually also never happen along those lines that you would be able to have something like that. So I don't have anything much else other than just look at the history and consider how the practice within your state and the regulations developed within your state. And
we have time for one more question, so I'll throw another big one at you. Why don't the states have a direct relationship with the National Board for Respiratory Care for credential verification?
No, answering that again for New Jersey, a few years back I did ask them, and I don't know, again, not in the licensing board, and I'm not answering for the MBRC, things could have changed. My understanding long in the past that the MBRC was sending out a fax, so you can see how long ago it was, but they were sending out faxes indicating that this person scored this person scored that. For New Jersey, as I mentioned, they want a letter to verify that the credential was granted, not just a copy of it. Again, it goes back to the fact that databases probably don't talk to each other. The MBRC may not be sending, because of all the varying requirements. Do I need a copy of my certificate? Do I need a verification letter? Will the state just accept that if the MBRC is sending it just a fax or an email notification or something like that? It goes back to the state requirements of what they want. It makes me think about the high school requirement and the one state that requires a birth certificate just to verify how old you are. If they're looking at it from this is what the regulation is, that we need this, then it needs to come in that fashion. If they want a copy of the certificate, it has to be the certificate, and it's not the MBRC's role. It would be our role applying for the license to gather that information and send it to the licensing boards.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you again for joining us today. For those of
Thank
you
very
watching
much,
this as a
Joanna.
live presentation, please stay with us during the next brief pause for instructions on how to obtain your CRCE contact hour. If you are watching this program as an archive, this concludes our presentation.